Thank you so much. Well, hopefully the time will go by quickly because I'm going to show a lot of photos, 150 images and videos over the next 40 minutes or so. As Angela mentioned, a little bit of a prodigal son story. So I'm going to share a little bit about my past and how I came or stumbled into the world of nonprofit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the water crisis around the world through photos and stories and videos. And then I'm going to talk about Charity Water and the 7-year journey to building an organization from the ground up and trying to do things very, very differently. So I'll start with me as a kid. Born in Philadelphia, middle-class family. My parents apparently used a cereal bowl to cut my hair. And Dad was a middle-class businessman. Mom was a writer. Just a very, very normal family. When I was 4 years old, we moved from Philadelphia to the suburbs to this great house. And it was an energy-efficient house, which had a problem because, unbeknownst to any of us, the gas company had installed a furnace that leaked carbon monoxide. So it was a faulty furnace. There were cracks in it. My mom is fixing up the house. And I'm spending as little time indoors as possible. I'm playing with my friends after school. My dad's commuting and working brutal hours at a new job. And my mom one day, after just breathing in these fumes, specifically in the basement, on New Year's Day, she walks across the bedroom and she collapses unconscious. So we rush her, to the hospital, and after a long series of tests, the doctors find these massive amounts of carbon monoxide in her blood, and she is never the same again. Now, thankfully, it hadn't killed her, but the exposure had irreparably damaged her immune system. And she went from super healthy, vibrant journalist mom, super mom, to this kind of freak connected to oxygen, wearing charcoal masks, allergic to everything in the world. So I remember examples of that. My mom used to be an avid reader, but now ink would make her sick. From books. So my dad and I would have to bake her books in the oven to try to get out the smell of the print. And then she would wear cotton gloves so as to not touch the ink. And then she would put it into a cellophane bag with her charcoal mask, and sometimes she could read. If I wanted to see her as a child growing up, I would have to wash, all my clothes were washed in baking soda like 20 times and ivory soap, and I would see her outside. They moved out of the house into the country. And we would change positions with the wind, lest any scent that I might have picked up, in the real world, reach her and make her sick. So only child, family planning stopped. My parents did the best that they could in this situation. They had a very deep Christian faith, and they decided not to sue the gas company for negligence and just believed that, one day sense would be made of this tragedy. And I grew up taking care of Mom, doing all the right things as a kid until the age of 18. And hopefully none of you have any wayward kids, but it was this all-out rebellion. I moved to New York City. I grew my hair long. I joined a band. I started smoking weed. And now was time for me to look out for number one. 18 years growing up, helping to take care of Mom, playing by the rules. Now it's time to live a little. So our band immediately breaks up because we hate each other. But I learned that you could get paid to sell alcohol in New York City. And there was this job called a nightclub promoter. And not only would you drink for free, all your friends would drink for free. And all you had to do was fill up the clubs with beautiful people. And the more beautiful the people that came to the clubs, the more you could charge everybody for alcohol. So 10 years into the game, I'm climbing the social ladder to become one of the top club promoters in all of New York City. This is me in some VIP room with my business partner. We were selling $1,000 bottles of champagne that cost us 40 bucks. Bottles of Absolute that we would spend 30 on, we would get $500-600 just to sit at the tables. And I thought that I was, living the grand life. I always show this photo because it shows just what a miserable, soulish person I was. I am holding out the Rolex watch, so the photographer notices I own an expensive watch in this VIP room. So at 28, after a decade of decadence, I've collected the model girlfriend on billboards and magazines, the BMW, the grand piano in my apartment, and the Labrador Retriever. Everything I thought I wanted. And I was supposed to be really happy, and I was in South America, in Punta del Este with the jet set, and flying down on other people's private planes, watching our clients spend $10,000 a hand at Baccarat. going to parties in houses with little rivers running through the houses. And I just, the music stopped one day, and I realized that I was never going to find fulfillment. I was never going to find happiness in the next party. And that the legacy I was leaving was literally on my tombstone was going to be written, "Here lies the guy that got people drunk for a living." So I started re-exploring a very lost faith as a kid. Obviously, I'd walked away from everything. I had a gambling problem, a pornography problem, a smoking problem, a drinking problem, a drug problem. And I said, I need to try and change everything in my life. What would the exact opposite of my life look like? So I come back to New York, and I get the idea that I'm going to give back one of the 10 years I've wasted, and I'm going to apply to humanitarian organizations, and I'm going to serve the poor. I had no interest in giving or generosity or doing anything for those 10 years. You may not believe this, but I thought Africa was a country, not made up of 40-some countries. And I started applying to these famous organizations saying, I'm ready to volunteer. Well, maybe not as a surprise to you, I'm denied by every organization who's like, what is a nightclub promoter? How would you in any way be useful to our mission in Sudan? And one organization, after a long list of denials, says, tell you what, if you pay us $500 a month, you can volunteer. So I said, great, where are you guys going? And they said, we're going to a country called Liberia, and we are sailing a giant hospital ship full of doctors into Liberia. So I said, great, I'm going to be your photographer and your journalist, because even though I haven't really done this for 10 years, I'm a storyteller. I was telling the story that coming to my club would give your life meaning, and setting you loose of a couple $1,000s would make you a better person. So I thought, I have a chance to tell a completely different story of whatever you amazing doctors are going to be doing in this country that I'd never heard of, called Liberia. So I leave everything, I sell all my possessions down to my DVD collection, start paying this organization $500 a month, and I join this hospital ship, which becomes my new home. Now, I went from a couple thousand square feet to about 150 square foot cabin with 2 roommates that worked in the engine room. Immediately started feeling sorry for myself until I saw how people were living in Liberia. And I went off the ship and saw people living in bombed out buildings, in houses that were once beautiful but had been completely destroyed through Liberia's 14-year civil war. Most of you know about Charles Taylor, the horrible child soldiers, the ruin that he brought to Liberia. When I sailed in, there was no electricity, no running water, no sewage, and no mail. It was completely broken. There was 1 doctor for every 50,000 people in the country. So I was there with doctors, and before the ship sailed in, we would flyer the country, small advance team, saying, here's what we do. If you have a giant tumor, if you have a piece of your face missing from flesh-eating disease, if you were born with a cleft lip, a cleft palate, if you've been burned during the war, turn up on this day, March 15th, and our doctors will try to help you. So I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew we had 1,500 surgery slots, and I grab my cameras. It's 5 in the morning. I jump in a Land Rover, roll up to the screening location, and there are over 5,000 people that have come for those slots. So that was like my first, oh crap moment. I mean, 3,000-some hundred people have come with hope of seeing a doctor and are going to be turned away just because we simply don't have enough capacity. Learned that some of them had walked from other countries. They'd walked for months in the hope of seeing a doctor that could help them. The first child in line was a boy named Alfred. It's a little hard to see the photo, but he was suffocating to death on his own face with an ameloblastoma. It's just a benign tumor. And his mom had parked him in the front of the screening location a few days before the crowd started turning up. So she pulls out this picture and says, my son Alfred was fine 4 years ago. Here's a picture of him then. And then this tumor started growing, and there was nowhere to take him. There was no surgeon, and I'm afraid he's about to die. So I've never seen anything like this. I sell bottles of champagne to beautiful people. I throw parties for Cosmopolitan magazine. So I run in the corner of this screening stadium, and I just start sobbing. I just lost it. And one of the medical officers came over to me and said, look, kid, this is the deal. You're going to see way worse than this. You're here. And we're going to be able to help Alfred. So he was very kind to me. I managed to get through 2 days. I saw things so much worse than this unthinkable suffering in living in a country without access to medical care. But I learned that we were there for a reason, and most of these stories would have happy endings. So a couple days later, I scrubbed up, got to see Alfred's surgery, and these amazing volunteer doctors who, instead of taking their families to Mustique, decided to fly in to Liberia and operate for free. And a couple days later, I got to take Alfred home with his new face and watch him heal. And it was an amazing, amazing experience, seeing someone on the brink of death because people had decided to serve and use their gifts and their talents for good, literally save lives. And that was day in, day out. Wake up, go down to the ward, meet Martha Lean, start talking to her. She told me that she would carry this towel in her hand because people would throw rocks at her. They thought she was cursed. When she left her hut, what she needed was a 40-minute max-fac surgery to get her face and her life back. So it was a pretty intense year. I took 50,000 photographs, met so many extraordinary doctors, so many extraordinary patients. And I signed up for a second year. Now, this whole time, I am blasting my email list at home, pictures and stories like this. So you can imagine my list got a little smaller. Some people were like, take me off of the freaking tumor party list. This was cool when I was coming to the Prada store for open bar. But I don't want to have anything to do with this. But I realized that images and stories also had the power to move people in the right direction. And some people said, this is amazing. I didn't know that this was out there. How do I give money? How do I volunteer? And I started seeing these stories moving people towards compassion, towards generosity. So I signed up on the second tour. On my second tour, I start learning that dirty water is what's making some of these people sick. So thankfully, even though it was a giant medical operation, there was one guy off to the side that was given a little bit of money, and he was working on water in the villages. So he would take me out in his Land Rover, and he'd say, these are the sources of water for rural Liberia. And this is the water that people are using to drink, to bathe. And I remember saying, well, no freaking wonder things are growing on people's faces. I was selling $10 bottles of Voss in my nightclubs, and I would see kids come out of the woods. They would fill up their buckets, they would drink the water that I wouldn't even let my dog drink, and then take it back to their families. So what he would do, and the horrible irony in these countries, at least in Liberia and Benin, was there was clean groundwater underneath the villages. And the locals didn't have the expertise, they didn't have the PVC, they didn't have the pumps, they didn't have the dewatering gear and the generators to actually build sustainable wells. So he would work with them, they would contribute all the labor. I'd go back and I'd see these same children drinking clean water a couple months later for a fraction of the cost of the expensive surgeries that we were doing. So I kind of started putting this together, and I come back to New York City. I'm 30 years old now. Everything in my life has changed. I've given up every vice. So I've never had another cigarette, and I never gambled again, and I never touched the nasty drugs again. And my friends are kind of wondering what's next. Did you do this to get girls? What, are you going back to the parties? What's next? And I said, no, what's next is you're going to start giving me money, and we're going to start helping people. So I was incredibly passionate about the work the doctors were doing, but this guy off to the side seemed like he was answering the question behind the question of so much of this sickness and disease. And I started getting really interested in water. And even though I'd seen problems with education and people dying of AIDS and malaria, and I'd spent time living in a leprosy colony, I just couldn't get the image of people drinking from swamps out of my mind when my friends were all drinking bottled water and didn't even have to. So that's where the idea for Charity Water was born about 7.5 years ago. I'll talk a little bit about the water crisis, but not in the mind-numbing statistics that a lot of charities try to impose on people. I'll give you one. This is the scope of the problem. Pablo was talking about these problems as scale. This is how big it is. Right now, 800 million people don't have the thing that most of us take for granted because of where they're born. Here's what it looks like. If you were to come with me and jump on a plane with me and go into these communities, you'd meet kids like John Bosco. You'd watch him walk out of his hut into the swamp in the middle of his village, and you would learn that this is the only water he's ever had is in his entire life. You would see communities in Ethiopia sharing open wells with their cattle. You might learn about some of the diseases associated with water, besides the ones you've heard of, like cholera, obviously, or trachoma. Diseases like schistosomiasis or schistosoma, which is just a nice word for parasites or worms. About 300 million people right now have worms crawling in their body from the nasty water that they've had to drink. And this is actually what this looks like. This was a child in Athens, Kenya, and she was drinking from a river, and every time she would drink, she would throw up on her shirt. I watched this in repeat for a few minutes, and in horror, we took the water away from her and promised to try to find a solution for her village. But I actually wanted to know what was in her water. And I brought it back, this bottle, and I gave it to a lab at Rockefeller University and said, hey guys, can you put this under a microscope and tell me what's going on there? And they made me this video. And they said, we're not experts on all the different amoeba and parasites, but that water is definitely alive. No child should be drinking water that is replicating before our very eyes. Leeches. Okay, in a million years, I had never associated leeches with drinking water. But community after community that we would visit would hold out their hands. They would show us the leeches. They'd say, the big ones are never really a problem. We can always filter them out. But sometimes these little leeches will get through our cloth, through our scarves, through the shirts that we use to filter the water. And they like to crawl up to the back of the throat. It's a leech's favorite spot. And two common ways that a community member will get a leech out of the back of the neck of their kid. They will either use a stick and try to pry the leech off and actually kill it so it doesn't just crawl back up again, or they'll give their kid a little bit of diesel fuel, enough to hopefully kill the leech and not injure their child. Learned that half of the world's schools didn't have clean water. If there was a second issue I was passionate about, it was probably education. And there were 50 million schools in the world that didn't have clean water or toilets. So if kids had to go bring their nasty river water a couple hours every single day in the morning to school, and the girls, when they hit puberty, didn't have anywhere to go to the bathroom, how good could these schools be? How good could the state of education ever be throughout the developing world? And we learned the link between water and sanitation and hygiene, that it wasn't always as simple as water. If it was a school, it was water and toilets. I've seen a lot over the last 7 years. Of all of the stories that I've heard, I think the one that moved me on a personal level the most deeply was the story of a woman named Keynote in Ethiopia. A huge portion of our work is there. I've been there 20 or 21 times over the last couple years. And on a visit about 2 years ago, I was sitting in this $6 a night hotel room with a couple donors. The hotel owner comes out of the kitchen and says, "You're the charity water people. We know your work here. It's amazing. It's needed. Let me tell you a story about a woman that lived 10 years ago in my village." So he sits down, he starts saying, this girl was 13 years old. Her name was Keynote, and she would walk 8 hours every single day. And she didn't have the yellow jerry can, which you saw in some of those photos. She had a clay pot. And the clay pot itself weighs 10 pounds. Then you put 40 pounds of water. So imagine this, 13-year-old girl walking with 50 pounds on her back, 8 hours a day. He says one day she comes back into the village after her 8-hour walk, and she slips and she falls, and the clay pot breaks, and all of the water spills out. And he said rather than go back to the village, she took the rope that hung the clay pot on her back, and she hung herself from a tree in the middle of the village. And he let that sit with our group, and he said, "The work you're doing is important," and he walked back into the kitchen. And I remember thinking, is it true? 13. Confirmed the story with our local partners who actually went into the village, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. Earlier this year, I said, I want to go to the village. I want to walk in her footsteps. I want to see the tree. I want to meet her mom. I want to meet her family. And see if anything has changed 10 years later. So about 7 weeks ago, I flew up to the north of Tigray, and I drove 4 hours to the end of the road. The village is pretty cut off. It's a rural village, so I had to rent a donkey and walk 9 hours over the mountains into the village. And I finally reached this village called Maida, where about 2,800 people were living up on a plain. Pitched my little tent next to the chief's house. And then in the next morning, I got up and I started learning about Keynote. I wanted to know what she was like. I met her mother, who told me how she felt when she saw her daughter being brought to her covered in a white shroud. She said she threw herself into a rage and injured her back and has never been the same since. She said, if you want to talk to her friend, she lives over there. Her friend showed me the clay pots that they were using, and this is Yeshereg. They left the exact same day. They did the walk together on the way down. And she's still walking today. Now she's using a yellow jerry can, which weighs less and will break when dropped, but is still walking the same distance. It took me to the actual source. Now, it's almost impossible to imagine how steep this is. Maybe some of you guys have gone, like, I don't know, hiking in Zion or Bryce Canyon, one of these amazingly beautiful places. Well, it's the village at the top, and about 2,000 feet down are the water sources. And they're walking down these treacherous paths, and I remember walking down in her footsteps saying, like, is this safe? Through a translator, and they said, well, people have died here, and so fell off a couple years ago, named her name. Get to the bottom to see what source she was using, and there's just this line of cans waiting because the yield of the spring is so low, and it's just this kind of hole in the rock. So they're filling about 1 jerry can, 5 gallons, every half hour. So everybody just wait. So she said nothing has changed here. They remembered her. She takes me up the top of the mountain and where the road forks, and she went left that day, and Letikiros went right. The last time she saw her friend, she showed me the tree where they found her. And I talked to the priest who buried her and said 2,000 people came to her funeral. And everyone that knew her said this remarkable 13-year-old girl didn't go back because she was filled with shame that she had let her family down. Her family was waiting for the water. They were waiting for the water to cook dinner. And she couldn't bear the thought of having spent 8 hours and coming home empty-handed. Living in a village without water for a week like this obviously changes you. And it's a human issue. This is not about statistics. It's about people with names, with faces. And right now, in a few hours, people are going to wake up and they're going to continue walking this same path because nothing has changed for them yet. Okay, it's going to get happier. So what drove me crazy was this was a solvable problem, and we actually knew how to bring clean water to every single person in the world. There are lots of problems we don't know how to solve. There's no one right now that needs to drink dirty water. And if you take a solution-agnostic approach, if you don't try and jam one magic filter down the entire world's throat, we know how to bring clean water into every community. So sometimes it's a hand-dug well, like my friends were doing in Liberia. Sometimes you can drill up to 1,000 feet, get groundwater. Sometimes you can harvest mountain springs. Sometimes you can catch the rain. Sometimes there's arsenic or fluoride in the groundwater. You can build pond filters, run them through chambers, biosand filters, carbon, UV, UF. We took a solution-agnostic approach, but we found that normally in these rural communities, small solutions work the best. For as little as $65 in Cambodia, you could clean surface water that looked like this by building a simple biosand filter. The community would actually contribute the labor. The women would make it. They would contribute $5 to the project. And you'd put dirty water in the top, get clean water out of the bottom that you or I could drink. And I drank this glass of water. It's completely fine. Hand-dug wells, about $6,000, and you're often going 40 or 50 feet underneath a village that has never had clean water. And people ask me a lot, how come they're just not digging their own wells? This is the crucial moment. You can see this is a good sign. There's actually water coming in at the digger's feet. But for this water project to be sustainable, you need to go another 20 feet deep. And that requires a $2,000 generator and a $2,000 dewatering pump. So when the water table drops in the dry season, the well doesn't go dry. Concrete culverts are made. They line the wells so they don't collapse over time. And it costs about $10,000 to drill a well. And it's a much shorter process, actually. About 3 days of drilling. You bring in $1 million drilling rig and compressors and trucks and 8 skilled local drillers. And it's amazing to be there at that moment when a community gets clean water for the very first time. Often it's a celebration that lasts hours and hours, sometimes a day. Dancing, people throwing popcorn, bringing the best that they have. And we've seen time and time again, community after community, that water changes everything. It is a transforming element. When you bring clean water into a community, it obviously changes the health. If kids are not drinking water with leeches, with parasites, water that's fecally contaminated, they're healthier. They spend more time in school, so we're able to track that education is improving. Women and girls, if they have a toilet at the school, they don't have to stay home 4 or 5 days every month. They're not ashamed to go to the school. If women and the girls aren't walking 8 hours every single day and they have a water point in their village, they're able to get an education. We hear amazing stories of the small businesses that have been started when the time is given back. You know, the interesting thing about living in that village, as nasty as that water looked to me, not a single person I talked to in a week complained about the quality of the water. They complained about the time. And the women said, man, if we could have 8 hours back in our day, every day, what we would do with it. Some of them wish they had a donkey so they could take 4 times the water on a donkey and go for water on a Monday and have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday off. And the extra time women use, they start small businesses. Some of them say we just spend more time with our kids. We're just better mothers. We're able to provide for our families. What I loved about water, what I loved about the issue, I just thought it was something that everybody could agree on. There are few things like that in the world. Clean water could cut across religious lines, across political lines. You know, you don't even begrudge your enemy clean water. No one in this room wants that child to drink the water on the left. No one would give your own child dirty water. And I didn't understand why there wasn't a movement to help people in this way. Lots of interesting data coming out of the United Nations recently on the economic impacts of water. They did an 88-page study that said every dollar invested in water and toilets yields $4 to $12 in economic returns to the local communities. In some communities, they found it was as high as 24 times return. Some of the stuff I mentioned, time savings, improved health, improved education, the ability to work and earn an income with that extra time. As you can imagine, the community involvement is key to the success of any water project, working with the locals, training up water committees. This is a typical water committee made up of equally men and women. They make the woman the treasurer, the guy the secretary. She's trusted with the money, and she collects about $1 from every single person who uses this water point. And this is the group that is responsible for the maintenance of the project, to make sure that water is continuing to flow in that community over time. I'll give you a very different picture of Leta Kiros' story. Helen Appio is a woman who got clean water after many, many years. In fact, the first time in her life. And the story is our team was trying to actually sneak into her village in Uganda. It was at the end of a long day. They'd seen a lot of projects. They were trying to just get in without all the fanfare. And Helen somehow got wind that they were coming, completely blocked the road. She's in the green in the middle. So typical celebration. Helen and the women dance, party for a while. Finally, Becky, who was our water program director, sits down with Helen and says, Helen, how is your life different? Like, what has water meant to you as a woman? Why are you so happy? So Helen starts telling the story of 2 jerry cans. She said, I had a family of 4, a husband and 2 kids, and I would get 10 gallons every single day for my entire family, and it was far that I had to walk. And she said, now that there is a water point in my village, I don't have to make the decisions that I made then. She said, I would always have to wonder, do I cook with the water? Do I clean? Do I wash my husband's clothes? Do I wash my husband's body? Do I wash my kids' bodies? Do I wash their school uniforms? She said, there was never enough water, and now there's enough water. And Helen said to Becky, she said, now I'm beautiful. And Becky said, you know, of course you're beautiful, Helen. What do you mean? She said, no, you don't understand. Now I feel beautiful Because as a mother, I always put my family first and my personal hygiene last. And she said, now there's enough water for me to wash my face. Now there's enough water for me to wash my body. Now there's enough water for me to wash my clothes. And now I'm beautiful. And she had this beautiful dress on, and we thought, man, we never thought the stuff we take for granted, water had the power to make a woman feel beautiful just by doubling the quantity, which would still be a fraction, a tiny fraction of what every one of us use and often take for granted every single day. So Charity Water was started 7 years ago from a couch, really. This was the apartment. So 10 years of debauchery, 2 years in Liberia. And I come back, I'm completely broke, because nightclub promoters are not great at saving money. And Mercy Ships was taking all my money. And then, of course, as you go in Africa, you're just trying to support everyone and everything that you can. So I'm crashing on my friend's couch. And, everything had changed with me. I mean, I was running around telling everybody, life will never be the same again, and you've got to join me. I was telling everybody I wanted to end the water crisis before I died. Big task, but I figured I had 40 or 45 years left to throw at this thing. Maybe I had a chance to rewrite a different legacy. And I thought I could create a world where my kids or my grandkids would grow up and children weren't dying of bad water. Children weren't drinking water with leeches in it. The second thing I wanted to do, though, was I wanted to reinvent charity. I wanted to reinvent the way people thought about giving. And I wanted to create a new model that would have been attractive maybe to selfish people like me who've been, chasing models and bottles for 10 years. And as I was talking to my friends and my clients, they were saying, I don't give to charity because I don't trust charities. And I started hearing the excuse of the black hole come up time and time again. I don't know how much of my money will actually reach the people on the ground. I don't know the impact. And everybody seemed to pull out a horror story from their back pocket of a charity that had run off with the kitty or hired their mothers and brothers and nieces and nephews. And Anderson Cooper doesn't help. Every week, every year, he runs around and chases the bad charity CEOs, and they slam the door in his face. And I thought, man, there's a new way, there's a new business model for charity that could speak to this younger generation and get some of these people who aren't giving excited about it again. So I had three big ideas. One was to solve the money problem and figure out a way to use 100% all the time of every public donation to directly fund water projects. Now, the only person I saw out there doing this was this guy named Paul Tudor Jones, who fortunately for him was a billionaire. But he said, I'm going to make sure that all the money given to Robin Hood goes to support these programs, and I will handle, with my friends, the staff and the overhead. And I thought, well, that's a brilliant model. I'm living on a couch, so I'm not sure how this is going to work out for me. But I did go and open up 2 bank accounts with $100 each. Said money will not be fungible at Charity Water. Every dollar from the public will go into a bank account that we cannot touch, and then we'll somehow try to get people excited about funding the staff and the operating costs of the organization. I said, we're going to take it a step farther than Robin Hood. We're actually going to pay back credit card fees. We're going to raise money we didn't even get from the public. So if they used their Amex and made a $10,000 donation, and Amex took a 4% cut, we would separately raise that $400, make the gift whole, and send all $10,000. The second thing we would do was use the technology of the day to prove where people's money went. Again, I was hearing, I give money to a charity, I just don't know where it actually went and what it did. And I kind of put two things together. We had started at the same time as Google Earth, and I'd walked into a Best Buy and saw that handheld GPS devices were $100. Now, we were going to be funding water projects around the world. I said, for $100, I have a free place to put all this data and make it all transparent. So we said, we will never fund a single water project in the world unless we can be guaranteed proof that it exists, and from day one, we'll make all of that public. So anybody can go see any water project within 10 feet. Third thing was a little softer, but I really wanted to build a brand. Nick Kristof had written in the New York Times that toothpaste is peddled with more sophistication than all the world's life-saving causes. And I thought, this is so sad, so broken. Charity websites 7 years ago were like the worst things I'd ever seen. They were worse than insurance companies. They would throw 100 links at you and ask people to read 100-page white papers. There was no Nike. There was no Apple. There was no charity that my friends wanted to be associated with. It was inspirational and creative and imaginative and hopeful. So I thought, you didn't need a lot of money to build a brand. You just needed good taste, a couple designers. So day one, 7.5 years ago, before I say, probably one of the most important things about the business model was what we wouldn't do. We would not go drill wells ourselves. What the heck did I know about hydrology? And this was good because as we traveled around, we found that the best and most sustainable work was done through local partners. Some of them had been at it for 35 years, like the guy in the bottom right. Joe Madiath in Orissa, India, started his organization 36 years ago when he saw his grandfather feeding an untouchable, a dalit, from a hole in the ground. And he said, "Grandpa, why would you feed a person like a dog?" And his grandfather said, "Because they are dogs." And that changed his life as a child. He spent the next 36 years using water and sanitation to bring equality to the lowest caste in India. He had built up a team of hundreds of people, but his website was terrible. He had no money. He had no fundraising skills, no marketing skills. So he said, we're going to raise awareness. We're going to build a global movement for clean water, something we think everybody can believe in, and we're going to grow through the local partners. We don't need to fly charity water flags all around the world. Let's double Joe's organization. Let's triple it in size. Let's get him the trucks and the rigs and the materials he needs to lead his own communities forward. 7.5 years ago, started in a nightclub. It's the only thing I knew how to do at the time was to throw a party. So I got 700 people to turn up. I charged them $20 at the open bar, at the door, and I gave them an open bar. And this time, instead of pocketing and going home with 15 grand, we took that money to a refugee camp in northern Uganda, and we did our first few projects. And then we sent the photos and the GPS back to the 700 people that had come to the party. People were blown away. Some of them couldn't even remember coming to the party. Thought it was amazing that they had been generous and that a charity had bothered to tell them where $20 went and to prove it to them. And we said, let's just keep closing the loop. Let's keep showing people their impact. Wanted to creatively partner with brands. We went to Saks Fifth Avenue and said, guys, you have somehow figured out how to sell women $5,000 handbags. That's amazing. We have $5,000 wells, and we're both New Yorkers. We should totally partner. They did not throw us out of the conference room, and they wound up liking the idea and shooting their catalogs for 2 seasons in water. They gave me the windows of the Fifth Avenue store for a week after Armani took his windows down to raise awareness for the issue. Then they started talking to their customers, their vendors, their employees. Raised $700,000 to bring clean water into 140 communities. After this, the McAllen came to us and said, we love what you're doing. There's a lot of water in Scotland, and there's a lot of water in the making of whiskey. How can we help? We're like, you tell us. So their marketing team thought about it for a little bit. They came back and said, we found a 64-year-old McAllen. It's our most precious possession. What if we took it on a world tour? And if people wanted to taste it, they had to drop $5,000 for a water project. And we're like, you people are crazy. Who's going to pay $5,000 to taste your whiskey? $605,000 from a bottle. Broke the Guinness World Record 4 times over. Started partnering with bigger brands. American Express came to us and started talking about the idea of a new card member, of a passion project, of people following their passion to make the world a better place. It wasn't about the bling. It wasn't about the black card, which I didn't have. And they started taking out ads, spreading awareness about our work. They gave us the homepage for 3 months as people would log on. Drove a video to over 2 million views asking people to get involved in the mission. We love social media. We were the first charity to get 1 million followers on Twitter. We were the first charity to use Instagram. We were actually the first few brands in the world. Built a culture of young, early adopters. This was where fundraising was going in the future. It was not direct mail. We've never direct mailed anything. I don't know people that write checks to charity anymore. It wasn't the movement that we were trying to build of the future. We wanted to tell our story, mobilize a global community, and the costs were almost nothing. It cost us nothing to press a button and reach 1.4 million people with our message on Twitter. We weren't buying stamps. We weren't sending expensive maps or newsletters. And then we stumbled upon this big idea. We asked people, what if we went after the birthday? The birthday has become this kind of selfish thing. People, get tons of crap that they don't need. Handbags and, ties, wallets, iTunes gift cards, Amazon gift cards. There's 800 million people in the world that don't even have water. What if we could people could use their birthdays for good. And we said, we have a sticky idea. I was turning 32, and I gave up my birthday. Instead of throwing another party in a club, I asked everyone I knew to donate $32, my age in dollars. And I said 100% of the money will go to water projects, and I'll drill via satellite if we reach our goal. So I raised $59,000, almost all of it $32 at a time. I said, wow, everybody in the world has a birthday. Nobody needs more stuff. What if we could create an army, turn the birthday into a giving moment? So this 7-year-old kid in Texas gives up his 7th birthday, starts knocking on doors asking for $7, and he raises $22,000. Wow, big idea. It just starts spreading like crazy. Justin Bieber tweeted 3 times, raised $47,000, started spreading through sports. Tony Hawk through business, the CEO of Burberry, Angela Ahrendts, who's now moving over to Apple. We had people from Hollywood. Will and Jada Smith not only gave up their birthdays, but asked their fans to give up birthdays, came with us to see their impact. Most of the money was raised by 6-year-olds like Lori, 16-year-olds like Maggie Moran, not famous people, people you've never heard of, 89-year-olds like Nona Ween. Gave up her birthday and said, I'm double the life expectancy in many of these countries. I want more people to have the opportunity to live healthy, vibrant lives like I've had the opportunity to live. Some people said, I can't wait until my birthday. I got to do something now. And they started climbing mountains, trying to raise $1 a foot. People started skydiving for charity water, giving up wedding gifts, giving up anniversary presents, honeymoons. These guys biked across America for us. These guys sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, making charity water flags. We've had 4 or 5 people walk across the country now in solidarity of the millions walking every day. Riley ate rice and beans for a month. Tried to do 1 project, she wound up doing 3. And her mom actually sent us this photo and said, Riley saw the statistic on your website that 5,000 kids die every day of bad water. And she wanted to know how big that problem was, and she asked me for a paper and a pen, and she wrote 5,000 lines down. It took her 3 days to finish. Most of our fundraisers, they were these amazing inspirational stories. There was one story that I have to tell to honor her that is so ingrained in the charity water story, and it was the story of Rachel Beckwith. Rachel saw me speak. Her church in Seattle had raised a bunch of money, very young group of people, and I had asked everyone at the end to consider giving up her birthday, so she gives up her 9th, and she set a goal of raising $300 and raised only $220. She was super bummed. She told her mom, I'm going to try harder next year. I was in the Central African Republic at the time. I'd landed in New York and got a text from her pastor saying, Rachel's just been killed in a car crash. There was a 20-car pileup on I-90. She was the only fatality. As a tractor trailer ran into the back of her car, her mom was driving with her sister in the front. And they said the family would like to open up her fundraising campaign and honor her last wish, which was for kids that she'd never met to have clean water instead of gifts or a party. He said, my church is going to blow this thing up. Opened up the thing, and people in his community started donating $9 and $99, and they took the campaign to $100,000. The Seattle community got a hold of it, took it to $300,000, and then it started spreading around the world, and people in Africa started giving. Hearing of this girl in Seattle that cared more about them than birthday presents, she wound up raising over $1.2 million from over 60,000 people. I met her mom for the first time, young single mom, and I remember just blurting out, Samantha, you need to spend the 1-year anniversary of Rachel's death with me in Ethiopia, meeting the people, meeting the children that your daughter served. And she started crying, and I started crying, and she said, I'd love to come. And that trip happened not too long ago, and she came with her grandparents. We fast-tracked the work, and we made a short video just to honor Rachel and her legacy and her incredible, incredible heart that I'll share with you guys as I end.
6 in the morning and we're about to go see some of Rachel's wells.
I am Richard. I am Rachel's grandfather. I really wish Rachel could be here today because, first of all, Rachel would think that this is probably the neatest thing she'd ever seen in her entire life.
Our community, our church, where we are from, we greatly love Rachel and continue to love her family. And I'm overwhelmed with how greatly you have honored her memory. So please receive my most deepest and heartfelt thanks. You've done us a great honor today, so thank you. Yep.
Rachel developed such a big heart from such a young age that she understood and felt the pain of others on the other side of the world. To give up her birthday present so that other children can improve their lives is the most beautiful gift a person can give.
So what Rachel really taught the organization was it started out as our story, was not ours anymore. It belonged to our supporters. It was their story. It was Max's story and Lori's story and Maggie's and all these extraordinary people who had joined the movement, over 500,000 people around the world. And we needed to give it away. And if we continue to give our story away, maybe we actually could bring clean drinking water to everybody in the world. So we focused on using technology to show impact, to close the loop. We started tying every single dollar using the 100% model down to the projects they fund. We started funding drilling rigs, mounting GPS units to them, giving them Twitter accounts, so our rigs actually tweet their location as they drive around drilling. Full transparency in the process. And finally, working with Google to actually develop a new sensor that we can put in these water projects where I could give you guys on a smartphone app the data of how much water is flowing in a well that you've sponsored halfway across the world. All that has added up in 7 years to about $125 million from a cold start, thanks to the generosity of 500,000 people around the world. But we don't keep score in money raised, it's how many people we're able to help, and we've now helped over 4 million people in 20 countries around the world. There are over 1,000 locals today employed on charity water projects. That number is growing. And last year, we were just shy of helping 1 million people get access to clean water. Over 2,700 people every single day, or one person every 30 seconds. And I'm so interested in taking back some of these negative statistics. Let's talk about the problem being solved, and let's invite people into that. I got one more slide. I just hit the wrong button. As we look forward, 4 million out of 800 million, there's a lot of work to do. So we're continuing to try to take this to scale. And we put a marker in the ground at 100 million people. We're 4% of the way there. We want to directly help 100 million people get clean water, and then make sure water continues to flow, and then go from there. So if you guys are wondering how you might get involved with us, how you might get some of the families involved, there are ways to support water projects in communities. We work in 22 different countries. There's a program called The Well, which is made up of 90 givers. So they make the 100% model possible. People from business, people from tech, people from finance, from Hollywood. 90 people make it possible for 500,000 people and growing to give at 100%. You could learn more about that. Or everybody here could give up their birthday. The average birthday campaign raises $1,000. Nobody in this room is average. You'd probably be 10 or 20x that. And it's a great way to involve your friends, involve your community, and actually see the impact that you've made. I'll put my email up. It's scott@charitywater.org. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and thank you so much for letting me share with you.